Merry Christmas to everybody and have a good, happy New Year.
Yes, thank you. And everyone watching, please remember to like like the video. Oops, pardon me, I'm knocking the globe over. And subscribe to the channel for more scintillating conversations with us and all our friends here. And please do comment below. What is your opinion? What do you think of CBDCs? And do you know Bitcoin? Yeah, so I guess you're also getting all ready for Christmas too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Christmas is celebrated, although it's more of a commercial celebration.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, fun.
Hold on. Let me see if I can get rid of these this headset.
Okay.
How do I
Yeah, we can
change?
test it out. I just hit record, so we'll be ready. But yeah, we can get organized in the studio. I'm still practicing to look at the camera, but I have the control on the laptop over here.
Yeah, I
So
know what you mean.
if you see me looking away, it's because I'm actually looking at the big picture. Yeah.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. The speaker test. The speaker test is somebody singing like Jingle Bells, in the tune of Jingle Bells or Christmas song. Okay, I
What?
think that'll work.
That's pretty updated. Wow.
Yeah, really keeping up with the times.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have any echo feedback or anything?
No, I don't hear any. Do you? Oh,
Okay.
I hear it. Test your speakers. What
Okay.
kind of program is that?
Oh, it's just the stream this thing. Uh,
StreamYard. Oh,
yeah, StreamYard. Yeah, if you go
that.
into the settings.
Oh, how funny.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm real impressed with the software.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay. I think if yeah, if there's no echo, then we're ready to
Mhm.
go. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All righty. So I will begin here. I'll do an intro. Good day, world. Welcome to Be in the Moment. Today, we are thrilled to be here with Jerry David Chan, Wall Street technologist, the leader of Frobots Innovations, and a real expert in the realms of finance and Bitcoin. So, today we are continuing the conversation along the exploration of central bank digital currencies. So, welcome, Jerry. Good to see you there.
Thanks for having me, Rory. Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Yes. So I know that you have a very experienced background working at all sorts of big companies like Bitcoin mining giant Tal, as well as classics like Goldman Sachs. So, would you be so kind as to tell us about your history working in finance?
Sure. So I mean, I'm an engineer by training. I worked in Wall Street technology for about 14 years. I started at Goldman Sachs, spent most of my career there, about more than a decade. Then I jumped over to did a 3 year stint at JP Morgan. I guess 3 years back then seemed like a short period of time, but these days I guess 3 years is long in a company in comparison. From what I hear, and all of these YouTube influencers who stay about 6 months at a place. Um, and so, but after that, I broke off out into my own and foray into blockchain development. I got sort of swept up in the initial Bitcoin um, not migration, but the first group of people, developers who went into Bitcoin trying to build stuff on this new technology. And I've been pretty much doing that ever since. I did another stint of about 2 years at financial group at SBI here in Japan, and to basically start up their blockchain development, their blockchain projects department, and then another year and a half stint at TAL, as you mentioned, which is a very large blockchain infrastructure company that focuses on the Bitcoin SV blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm sort of heading up Frobots, which is our own little startup for competitive coding. And it's more of a game, but focusing more on the application side while still using the blockchain technology in the back end.
Very neat. Yes, I watched one of your tutorials and I thought, wow, this really must be for coders.
Yeah, it initially is. This is sort of like a beta level for Frobots. So it is for people who are more familiar moving around a code editor than regular people who are just casual gamers. But the intent is at the end, we will have the final product will have a version where you can kind of code the Frobots using something similar to the no typing code, no type code. When you just drag and drop code blocks, very much like how kids program Lego controllers, Lego robotics, and there's like a huge coding based ecosystem or community centered around this technology called Scratch, which I think originally came from MIT, which is web based, and there's a lot of children, 8 to 16, who build a lot of stuff in Scratch because it's free, it's online. And so that sort of target audience will be able to code Frobots using some block language very similar to Scratch.
Brilliant. So they're learning through play.
That's right.
It's in the digital world.
That's right.
Wow.
They're learning and playing. Yes.
Right,
and using blockchain.
And building. Right.
Yeah.
So how can people follow your project and your startup there with Frobots?
Oh, just Frobots.io. That's just robots with an F in front. And yeah, from there we're kind of like in a closed beta, but for people who want to help test it out and build. Right now, as I mentioned, you do have to code directly by writing Lua code, and that's actually the point of a lot of these tutorial videos that I'm trying to make, so that it makes it a little bit easier for people to dive in. And once we have the the simulation engine and all the kinks worked out, then we put on that sort of layer in front with the GUI, so that you can do all this coding without actually writing code directly. Although for people who do want to keep on writing code directly because it's a little bit more powerful, then we'll still have that option open when we finally release.
Brilliant. Well, that's going to be exciting to see
really exciting.
Everyone joining in, and then what comes out of it too. Who knows? Maybe new innovations there as well.
Yeah, it is just the first step. It's the first step in insofar as I believe that once people start engaging, in this case, engaging in writing code, which is a very, very noble, thing, a skill to learn these days. And it also indirectly, I hope, introduces people to a very practical use of blockchain. Right?
And what is that?
Right. I guess I didn't even mention that. Well, it's because it's addressing the issue of NFTs and how to use NFTs properly. And I know this. I mean, this is I suppose it's a segue from your topic here, which is like CBDCs. It's not NFTs because they're fungible, but tokenization is one of the main use cases, general level use cases on blockchain technology. And so NFTs, most people think of NFT projects these days as just some sort of they think they're buying some sort of digital right or access to a ledger entry, which may represent something else, right? Which may represent a service, which may represent a right to a picture, a concert ticket, something like that. But that's really just scratching the surface of NFTs. What Frobots explores in a way which I hope is very in the background and it's so seamless that you won't even notice it, is that NFTs can also encompass some digital entity which doesn't exist outside of that digital world. And if this sounds something like Meta or Web3, that's exactly what it is. A lot of people think of avatars, right? People think of Web3 engagement in terms of my avatar, right? What do my person look like in that other digital realm? But that's for people who live outside of that digital space. For things which exist in that digital space, for instance, if you went into, I don't know, some virtual world, there you are coming from the outside, you have an avatar. But what about the entities that live in that digital world? Those things only live there, in which case those things are NFTs, but they can't come out, right? They have no expression outside, right? And, it's almost like they're inside. And what could these things be? Well, these things could be AI. These things could be agents, like NPCs in a game, right? The things that you fight against, the robot controlled players. So these things only exist in that world. These things must exist as NFTs because although you may be able to trade ownership of them, their existence is in this digital world. And that's actually where the blockchain comes in, because the blockchain gives them a persistence layer in that digital world. And so I think that representing non-player characters, for one, like these sort of like auto robot things in a digital world, is very natural application of NFTs. And that's exactly what Frobots are. Right, a Frobot, right? Except you're writing them, right?
Wow, this is super far out, and I love it. So when I go into Crypto Fights, the game, and I have my staff, and I'm knocking out some kind of strange frog or ogre, then I might go to the welder's shop, and there that would be the NPC, the welder, who's always there and will say, "Oh, which would you like? A bow and arrow, a sword? You can choose from this shelf." And then you go over there and you make your selection and you leave and you go back out into the game and continue playing in the different games. So these NPCs, or the non-playing characters, those would be the AI or the NFTs in your sense. And then could you relate this to the real world? How would that be practical?
Right. So how it would relate to the real world is that all of these sort of virtual agents that live inside this virtual universe, when we want to interact with them, we do so with them as through NFTs. So for instance, like the good example you just quoted, like Crypto Fights, all of the items obviously could be NFTs, right? The particular axe, the armor that you have, right? Each of those are NFTs. Why? Because we want to be able to trade ownership of them in the outside world, outside of the game. Now, if they don't need to be traded outside of the game, they don't really need to be NFTs, right? You could just, it could be World of Warcraft, right? All items are traded within World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft provides the marketplace by which you can exchange things. And if you always stay within that universe, there's no need for NFTs. But the NFTs are needed when outside of the game, you want to trade that World of Warcraft axe, the battle axe +7 or something like that, to somebody else, and you want to sell it to them for whatever. I don't know, Ether, Bitcoin, something, right? And if I want to be able to make that trade between wallets outside of the game, those things need to be NFTs. So with items, that's natural. That's kind of like what a lot of people are trying to use NFTs for right now, trading ownership of digital items that exist somewhere else or some service, right? But what I'm trying to do with Frobots is, like, it's not just the items. These entities themselves are NFTs, which means you can kind of trade ownership of these robot AIs. I mean, you end up writing them, but maybe then there's an economy for people who are good at coding AIs that are better at winning battles than other ones. And in a sense, then it becomes kind of like like a virtual, those games where you pretend to be the manager of a football club, right? You hire the coach, you buy,
Mhm.
get sign contracts with the players, you play like a FIFA session and da da da. Like it ends up being kind of like that. That's kind of like the universe I want to build, except Frobots are really just competing in a sort of like a all out winner take all sort of arena battle, like Tron, right? Something you would see in Tron. So imagine those Tron programs are, you write them or you pay somebody else to write them. Then you can sell them because they're an NFT,
Mhm.
and they exist there mostly in any time as just a piece of code. But it's not just the code that's important now, because it's really the Frobot itself has a history, right? You could copy any code, just like if you remember in Tron Legacy, there was the main protagonist had his father made a program of himself called Clue, right? And Clue got wonky and bad. He ended up taking over the digital realm. But so you could have a clone of yourself, but that's just a copy of the code at any one point in time. The NFT itself is valuable not because of its code at any point in time, but because of its history, because of the battles it's won, because of
Mhm.
maybe it was owned by somebody famous in the past, right?
Mhm.
You can't copy that. That's just
Right.
history.
Just like abstract art.
Well, yeah, it kind of, right.
Mhm.
And art in the real world is valuable because it can't be copied, right? You can always tell the copy. But in digital space, we can copy things perfectly, but we can't copy the history. And then what is the history? What makes history uncopyable? The fact that it's on blockchain, right? It is literally
Mhm.
a chain of transactions starting from when, Clue or whatever your Frobot avatar you created, when he was created or he or she was created, and it was modified by Rory, and then it was sold to, say, Kurt Wutker, and then Kurt modified it some bit, and then he sold it to somebody else. Now, if anybody were to copy that Frobot 1 year later, sure, they would get the exact code at that point in time, but they wouldn't get that history. They wouldn't get, like, that wasn't the Frobot that was created by Rory in
Mhm.
2022, right?
Right.
It's a clone of it, like the most recent copy of it, which is not even owned by Rory anymore, so it's not really that valuable. And so I really started off wanting to illustrate to people that it's not just, NFTs are not just used for, or just for a representation, a one-time snapshot of something. And that's not where the value really comes from. Not in digital space anyway, because we can copy everything perfectly. It's not like real world art where you can't. Since we can copy everything perfectly, having a copy of that is not valuable at all.
Mhm.
Not valuable unless you have like legal rights and everything to it. And I doubt any NFTs presently have proper legal contracts
Right.
attached to it, right? But even if you did that, that's not the most of the value. The most of the value comes from that particular token's history through the blockchain. And I think we're getting literally really far down this topic, and I'm sure it's not what you maybe intended. So I'll end it with
That's
this. So
okay. Yeah.
this use of NFTs is probably only doable on a blockchain like BSV.
Mhm.
Notably not like something in Ethereum. Why? And this actually is only technical people will understand this, because Ethereum doesn't track their tokens like a chain of transactions, a chain of
Mhm.
coins. Ethereum tracks a ledger balance. So your NFT is just a smart contract that sits there. Like, what has happened to that NFT, like in the past, you can't, it's not really stored as part of the Ethereum blockchain. The Ethereum blockchain just stores the latest snapshot, like who owns this now. If you
Mhm.
wanted to figure out who owned this 20 years ago, that'd be quite an exercise in digging through old transactions, and may even be pruned. I mean, the way Ethereum's is architected, it's going to be pretty impossible as time goes on for you to track the history of something, right, going far back. But Bitcoin tracks history, right? Bitcoin has, through Merkle trees, and the fact that the UTXO model is always one coin paying the next, and if you wanted to preserve that whole chain of whose hands it's passed through, you can literally keep all those transactions yourself, going back to its minting transaction. And when you sell it to somebody, you just hand this over, and they can verify it, right, with
Mhm.
SPV block headers. Like, yep, that was all of these transactions in this chain that's legit. I can verify these on the the SPV, the header chain, even if it was 100 years ago. So you can imagine how valuable something might be, right? And a Frobot created today, probably worth nothing. I mean, even if you did write a great algorithm that could win a lot of battles and win you a lot of virtual cash, even then it would still be not thousands, not what people are paying for these silly ape pictures, that's for sure.
Yes,
But
exactly.
right?
So I do have a question about that. Sorry, I interrupted you. Did you have another thought on that?
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, in 100 years, that Frobot, even if it wasn't very good at fighting battles anymore, that Frobot is going to be worth a lot of money because it has 100 years of history. How many things today you look at can actually reliably track where it's been for the last 100 years, right? I mean, you have manuscripts from Leonardo da Vinci, so that kind of level stuff, right? Even though it's like scribbles and it's not worth anything, that's valuable because that's lasted 500 years, right? So this is the value, the hidden value of NFTs on a scalable UTXO based blockchain like BSV that nobody's tapped yet.
Wow. So very early days. Exciting. So this is leading edge, what you're doing with Frobots. And I had someone that I was friends with ask me, hey, what do you think? Everything is going down and all this FTX stuff. It's pretty bad for crypto, eh?
Yeah.
And I said, no, it's people will finally pay attention to what matters.
Yes.
And then they said, well, have all this investment in the NFTs on Solana, I guess.
Solana, yeah.
Yes. And so I guess the prices have plummeted there. So this is not financial advice, but it is definitely something I'd like to let my friend know about. What can be done? How can they transfer value from the hyped up spots over to something lasting, like you're mentioning with the 100-year time span into the future?
When you mean transfer value, you mean what could they do about their existing portfolio? Or you mean more generally?
Yes. Their existing portfolio that is something they did maybe because somebody said, oh, this is good to do. And then now it's plummeting and they might, what can they do? Can they go to BSV? Would that even be valuable for them? I mean, I think it would be valuable. I'm telling them, hey, Handcash is coming out with these ability to trade your USDC for BSV.
Yep. Well, I suppose if it, in general, yes, if they can convert it over. But we're dealing with like many exchanges, so it like for instance, if their value is wrapped up in a specific NFT in Solana, which has a specific purpose or project attached with it, then I would say as a holder of the token, you really can't do much. I mean, you can hope that the project developers will port their project over to BSV, and in which case your token all the value might just transfer with the project, right? So
okay.
It's really up to the developers.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you, Jerry. I knew you would know. Yes. So that's very good to think about. And then, yeah, thank you for that. And I think this is a great segue into CBDC because CBDC is something when we talk of a central bank. I was speaking with Brittany the other day and I said, hey, when did you first hear of a central bank or the Federal Reserve? And we were sharing stories. And when we look at our history of the Federal Reserve system in the United States, it is just 100 years old, just over 100 years. So this is interesting to think about. What will we do with the next 100 years or 500 years into the future with our management of our systems? So, Jerry, let's start with, when did you first discover the Fed or a central bank? Were you a kid in school? Can you still remember that?
Ooh, probably when I first heard of it, probably too young to remember, probably in my teens or something like that. But when I probably first understood what they did, maybe not that long ago, 2006. I mean, I say that not that long ago. I mean, most people would, listening may not have been born back then, but but
That's true. I know. We're
yeah, it
getting
was.
older.
Yeah, we're old. We're old. Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe after the dot-com bubble, like
Mhm.
I remember having to do some sort of like basic finance 101 when I joined Goldman Sachs. And I think there they might have mentioned it, but it's one of those things you hear and it glosses over, you don't
Mm.
really absorb it. It was really, I think, after the dot-com bubble, and then that's when people
None?
started talking about the financial crisis was sort of
Okay. Mhm.
getting popular, well, getting heard about. I think 2006 was so people were complaining about subprime mortgages and it's going crazy.
Mhm.
And I think at that point, I really started looking to like how the central bank really drove the monetary system.
Ah,
So
great.
it was, yeah, maybe about 50.
So it was out of your curiosity to understand the current economy and the world, really.
Yeah. I
Mhm.
think it's essential that people should just really do basic reading on how the Fed works, because I would hazard a guess that more than 30% of folks who actually make or watch a lot of these videos, that because of YouTube, the explosion of user created content, there's a lot of misconceptions about central banking. So to watch, you should definitely watch all these contents created by people who are very anti-central banking. You should, but you should also read the fundamental, like, I don't know, the basic stuff about how a central bank is supposed to work, not how our existing central bank works, but how one is supposed to work.
Ooh, interesting. So what is the
Right.
difference?
Well, the difference is, I suppose, boils down to how corrupt your government is. So, and like, because, okay, like going back to, was it Jackson, right? Jackson had a lot of, it was anti-central banking.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to agree with him when you look at how our current central banks have been run. But there's also a huge, which kind of bias is this? Selection bias? I believe it's selection bias. But there's a huge bias to always think the central bank is doing something wrong. Why? It's because when the central bank does something right, you don't really feel it, right? Because
Good.
the central bank was originally an idea to sort of like to sort of prevent the economy from going too extreme in any direction,
Mm-hmm.
right? In both directions. If it's too slow, it has to speed things up. If it's going too fast, it has to slow things down, right? So that's in theory. And in theory, if we could stick to that goal,
Mm-hmm.
it would theoretically operate quite well. Now, the problem is human nature. And this is why when human nature is involved, corruption eventually gets involved, especially when the central bank has political, like, obviously there's political variables in there that affect it.
Mm-hmm.
But because of human nature, then it's easier to do things to chop off the bottom when things are going bad, like accelerate the economy when things are going slow. But it is hugely unpopular to stop the economy when things are going too good.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Just ask anybody in Bitcoin. Oh, I mean, would you like it if Bitcoin just like stopped at 20,000? If it ever went over 20,000, it's too much.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We want to bake into the protocol something that if the price of Bitcoin goes over 20,000, it immediately stops and it drops to like 15 or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because 20,000 means the economy is heating up too much. This is hugely unpopular. So no politician ends up wanting to be that president or that central bank governor who is basically saying, look, the economy is too good, right? Everybody's making too much money in the stock markets. Bonds are doing well. GDP's through, like, inflation is down, unemployment's down. Let's just like pull in the money, right? Like let's just crank up interest rates like to 20% or something like that. Let's stop this economic growth. Nobody says that, because too much growth is never seen as a bad thing to consumers. But it is. I mean, if you take a step back, you look at things in like decade scale, too much growth is how bubbles start. And it is the cause of the too much crash immediately after it, right? So if people
Mhm.
want to avoid the crashes, you have to stop the growth. So that's why if the central bank does stop the growth, people just get grumpy that they stop the growth. People don't know that they saved the world from having to do a huge crash after. So
Mm.
you never are appreciative
Mhm.
of the crash that never happened,
Mhm.
which is just unfortunate because
That's
that's
a very good point. Yes. And I recall Alan Greenspan had the quote, irrational exuberance.
mm,
So I think that was when we could see the example in crypto, let's say, when people just start running into things, they say, oh, yes, let's put all our money here. And then it could be dumped,
yeah,
and that was some irrational exuberance. Or we could see even with the .com boom and bust
yeah,
back in the, I would say 1999, it ended, right?
yeah.
What?
It started. I think definitely by 2000, it definitely popped. I think
Mhm.
the harbinger event there was pets.com. I think when
I
people
keep hearing
started
about this.
like I was like, why
That's
are
not
people
com.
investing so much money in a company that literally develops delivers dog food? Like that is just so stupid. How
Everybody has dogs.
Yeah, everybody has dogs and
Yeah.
they're so lazy they can't walk down to the pet store. Like seriously, are they that lazy? You-
Right.
right. But back to the question of like what it should do and what it shouldn't do.
Mhm.
The other misconception is that there is, a lot of people like to make a big deal about the fact that central bank is like it's not really the government. It's like it's privately owned and there's a bunch of shareholders who are secretly, making
Exactly.
all the money,
Yes, right.
right?
Yeah.
But that actually was part of the design, right?
Mhm.
Because because you're never going to get rid of corruption, right? So,
Mhm.
so I think people should really acknowledge that. Like, if you get rid of your corrupt government, something else will take its place, and that something else will eventually have incentives to become corrupt themselves, right? Acknowledge that that will always be the case. Like, I think a lot of the founding fathers thought this is why they were debating, and they're like, if we let banks do their own thing, then they will eventually do corrupt lending. They will do funny business like Tether is now, right?
Mhm.
Effectively that they are a bank back in the 18th century. So like we need to put a central bank. And then some other people said like, well, if you put a central bank, the government's controlling it. Well, then we will become corrupt, right? Because
Right. And
whoever's
all the people go there. Right.
exactly.
At
So
once.
I think the thing that was shown is okay. Well, how about we make it kind of government, but really it's run by the public sector. It's oh sorry, not public, the private sector, not
Mhm.
public, private
Mhm.
sector. It's really like entrepreneurs. It's really capitalists, like people
Mhm.
with a lot of money who will pool their money together, much like a corporation, so that
Mhm.
we know there's always profit incentive there. But they still have to answer to the government, but they're not directly controlled by the government. And I think that was
Mhm.
that was a compromise that was deliberately struck. But people see it as like the negative thing. It's like, oh, if only it was
Mhm.
government controlled, if it was really the treasury, it'd be fine. No, because it just moves the corruption to a different place, right? I mean, sure,
Hmm.
we have central banks in Japan. It's controlled directly by the government. There's no
Right.
private shareholders like the Fed does.
Yes. And when I looked at the Japan website for their central bank, I noticed that it said it was jury, jury something, jury. I'll have to find the link, but yeah, it was juridical. Maybe that was the word.
Oh,
But
oh, it's
it
held by the judicial
sounded, it wasn't judicial, it was jury. And then
jurisprudence.
no, it wasn't jurisprudence, but it was a
Altogether.
word I'd never noticed before. And
Mm.
it was related to the government. And I don't know, I got really good vibes reading the Japan Central Bank website. I thought, wow, they seem like they have integrity there. And yeah, I don't know, I just got that feeling from their website. Whereas with the Fed, I have more of skepticism, yet also some open mindedness because I have gone to events there. I've observed the people there. I've noticed people who have worked there or I think, hey, there could be good people there too.
Mm.
Just like in anything, there
Yeah,
could be people with integrity, and there could also be some corrupt folks too.
yeah,
So, like you say, we can't just tear everything down and say, okay, now we'll build it perfectly. It could be just that let's improve it, let's continuously improve.
absolutely. And I think the final really big misconception, which everybody, the tear it down people, like to
Hmm.
claim as like the thing they're fighting for, is this notion that the central bank creates all this inflation, and we would
Hmm.
just be better off without inflation. Um, now this is an economic argument, and there's no right or wrong answer. It always depends, and then
Hmm.
but the whole misconception that the central bank creates inflation is just a misconception, because while they do and they can, by far the largest source of inflation is not the central bank. It's just regular banking lending. It's the the credit money system. Every time you take out a
Hmm.
loan, right, a mortgage, you've created money. That's the
Hmm.
inflation that people are complaining about. If you
Right.
don't like that, maybe your bank shouldn't give you a mortgage loan, right? How would you like
Hmm.
that? Well, you can't afford your house anymore. Now you're complaining, right? So
Hmm.
it's silly. And I want to basically recount the first time I realized this was probably around 2014. So it's really late, actually,
Hmm.
because I had a debate with a person, a coworker of mine in JP Morgan, and I was kind of really thinking through this whole Bitcoin thing back then. It's like, well, it's kind of interesting that in this Bitcoin system, there's a set money base, right? We won't have inflation, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of economy that sort of grows. And he says, like, that's not the case. You can always have inflation. And I was like, what do you mean? It's like, you can have inflation in Bitcoin. I was like, no, there's only 21 million. You can never increase that number. He says that's bullshit. Not in that sense that he was saying that some developer could change that number, which of course they could, right? Especially in BTC, because they're trying to do that now. But not even in that case. He said inflation doesn't happen when you increase them, only when you increase the money base, which is how the central bank does it. The central bank increases the money base to increase inflation.
What is the money
There.
base?
Sorry?
What is the money base?
Oh, the money base is the all outstanding money in the system. So in
Ah,
Bitcoin, the
okay.
money
All
base
the
is
currency.
21
So
million.
like Tether. Tether creates
Like that,
inflation.
Tether creates
Right.
inflation by inflating the money base. Yeah, the
Right.
market base.
Okay. Very good.
Central bank can do that too. In the case when they do the thing where they where the treasury issues bonds, the central bank will then increase the money base to print money to buy those bonds. And that's how that's how the central bank creates money. But that actually is not the most common. No, it's the largest cause of inflation. He said you can have inflation too in Bitcoin, even if the money base remains 21 million forever. I said, how? He said, well, simple. If I take your Bitcoins and I pay you interest in it, I've created the money. I've inflated the money base, because
Hmm.
now there's I owe more money, more Bitcoins than I had. Well, then I was saying, well, how could you pay more than you have? There's only 21 million. He says,
Mm.
well, I take your Bitcoins, I invest it somewhere, I earn more Bitcoins, I pay you the interest rate back. So yes, there's debt created. There is now a floating debt in the Bitcoin system,
Mm.
which is exactly what we have now, right? Right. If you look at Tether, do you think there's
Hmm.
actually, of all the debts of all the people's accounts in Bitcoin, denominated in Bitcoin, do you think there's actually that much Bitcoin sitting somewhere?
Right.
Probably not,
That's what
right?
I saw on
Like
Twitter.
exchanges.
Right.
Exchanges. They
The
say,
exchanges.
this whole proof of reserves thing, right?
Yes.
If we believe now that exchanges don't actually have all your reserves,
Hmm.
then we have inflation, right? Because, like, look, the exchange on paper have $50 million of your Bitcoins. They took 40 million and they did something else with it. But on paper, they still have 50 million, liabilities to you. So when people measure Bitcoin now, they see that, the exchange has these 50 million. And then they also see where the Bitcoin ended up somewhere else, another 50 million. Now, all of a sudden, we have 100 million Bitcoin where we should only have 50 when you add it up. So clearly, I mean, people don't see this number because it's hard to actually account for where every actual Bitcoin is. And if you looked at the ledger, clearly there's only 21 million. But of that 21 million, what real US dollars terms does that represent? And that's the funny number, because if it doesn't make sense, people just explain it away as, well, the Bitcoin price went up. Well, maybe the Bitcoin price went up or down because inflation, but because somebody just lent out something and will promise to pay you back, but you only realize, so the inflation deflates, everything collapses when people start calling back their accounts, withdrawing, calling back their loans, right? And this is exactly how the real economy collapses, right? When you have a bubble, you have people thinking they have more money than they have because the same dollar is represented more than once everywhere. Everybody thinks they have claims to that dollar, but the first one to grab the real dollar out, and everybody realizes, oh shit, now I can't grab the dollar anymore. I panic, I grab everything else out. And then all of a sudden, the economy collapses, the bubble collapses. You've just, and when he explained it that way, I was like, you're right. That the entire real economy with real US dollars goes into boom and bust cycles, bubbles and recession and collapses, exactly because people are double counting the same dollar, right? Exactly like when you make a mortgage loan, you counted more than, money is created because your bank says you got here's money to buy your house, but then they take it and do something with it. Now that dollar's in the economy twice, right?
Right. Yes.
Right. And of course, this is a good thing. If we didn't have this, then the economy wouldn't grow. It's kind of like money needs to be in more than one place so that the best place does the best with it and ends up paying back their loans. And then the bad investments fail and they end up going into debt and bankruptcy and they collapse. So if you don't allow the collapse of things, of businesses, the growth is going to be unhealthy, because if everybody seems to be making money, that can't be, because there really isn't that much money in the system, right? So in those cases, now you see the need for a central bank. In those cases where everybody thinks everybody's making money, you need someone to step in and say, like, no, there's no way all of you are making money. Some of you should be going bust, because some of these ideas, like pets.com, is just stupid, right? Nobody's really paying for that. All right. Everybody's just sort of betting on your stock. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to suck the money out of the system, like what a central bank should, except they never do that. They only put money into the system. They never suck it back out. So if they did it right, we would have the optimal system. But human nature is nobody wants to say the party's over. Right. Even though they're supposed to. They're supposed to, like, you're the adult. You have to basically say, guys, the party's over. Everybody leave now. All right. Turn off the music. It's you guys. I know you guys are having a good time, but party's over. Nobody wants to be that guy, right? Nobody wants to be that politician.
Yes.
Which is the reason why you don't want it to be government. You're supposed to be separate from the government so the bankers can make this hard decision and be the asshole, while the politicians say, like, the central bank, I don't really control them. Right? I know, he can still save his face. He can still look like he's trying to do whatever he's due to get his votes. But the central bank shouldn't be privy to your votes, your democracy. Someone has to stop the party, right? And then so that's kind of like
the fact that they're private means that nobody can strong arm them either.
Supposedly, yeah. Unfortunately, that's not the case. But supposedly, yes.
So then when they have the official person like Janet Yellen or Alan Greenspan, they are the figurehead of the Fed. And then there would be, I guess, the shareholders that nobody knows. They're unaccountable.
Well, they are accountable to, the economy, I suppose. I mean, it's funny because people always point fingers at the mysterious shareholders of the central bank, like the six or whatever. They're probably the original banking families, right? Sure, the Wahlbergs, the Cohns, the Morgans, the Vanderbilts, and the Rockefellers, But even that other case, right? It's the same as pointing your finger at the miners, right? The miners of Bitcoin. How can we trust the miners of Bitcoin not to do something bad? Well, because the miners of Bitcoin benefit from Bitcoin price. They have to. This is the key of proof of work. And so in the same way, like, look, yeah, the bankers could do something bad. The bankers could do something really, unfair. But at the end of the day, if they screw up the economy, right, they screw up their own wealth, right? It's the value of the dollar they're protecting, just the same as it's the value of Bitcoin is what the miners are protecting. If the value of Bitcoin drops, then miners, lose value. They lose wealth. So if the value of dollar drops, all of these secret shareholders also lose wealth. And that, I know that's not a good guarantee, but it's almost like the best guarantee that you can you can come up with, right? Because any other system you try to impose upon this will eventually, everything will get corrupt. And so it's funny. I found it was kind of like almost fitting that the system of Bitcoin and the trust relationship you have to have with the infrastructure providers of the network, like the miners, the mining nodes, is very similar to what the founding forefathers ended up. Is like, this is the best we can come up with a system, right? I mean, we've tried in the past where it was government controlled. Basically, that just means the politicians who want to earn votes will steer the economy to special interests, right? Because like there will always be companies out there willing to pay campaign donations to a politician who will then tell the central bank to do something which benefits that company, or the beaver pelt, hunting company, or whatever they had back in the 18th century, right? The East India Company or something like that. So that level of corruption is rife. So they said, we have to separate it so that at least it's harder to corrupt. Now, is it corrupt today? Yeah, probably. It's because that the problem is you can't ever get rid of corruption. The only thing I think you can do, and I hope in the future Bitcoin allows for, is making these mechanisms more transparent, which means making corruption more expensive to engage in.
Good point. Good point. It's not a holy roller. It's just a record where everybody that can pay attention does, and then they say, hey, this is not okay. We see that you did this, and hold these people accountable.
Yeah.
Whoever, is in power.
Yeah. So I don't see any problem with the shareholders being anonymous or pseudonymous or private, and nobody knows who they are. Do you Bitcoiners keep saying like, we love our anonymity. Well, okay. Why are you pointing fingers at the anonymous people running the central banks? Like, they want to keep their anonymity and privacy as well. So it's the same thing. So it's the same argument. It's kind of silly that it's like, I don't like your system. I just want to use your system, replacing you with me.
Exactly. That is so from this kind of the punk movements, of the ciphers, and even some of the BCH days. They had that attitude big time. So that's a great point. Now, Jerry, you also have a long history in Bitcoin. So can you tell us about that? And I know I've heard it before, but it's very interesting. Like, how did you find yourself here within the BSV community from the early days till now?
Well, that's kind of a long story. I mean, are we okay with time?
Yeah, for sure. Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I realized I wasn't looking at. I'm looking at you, but I'm not looking at the camera.
I know. I'm looking at you too.
So the story, like, I guess I started off. I mean, I in 2012, I guess. So I started really getting more involved in Bitcoin when I left JP Morgan. That was like 2014. But I was just really trying to build something, and then I kind of hit these sort of technical difficulties, these obstacles that made it really hard to build anything. Actually, ironically, back then I was trying to do a token project, but I really didn't appreciate the whole compute, the distributed compute aspect. And I know back then there are people talking about it, like Ethereum ended up making their own project because they wanted to pursue the distributed compute. And I thought it was kind of a shame that Bitcoin couldn't do that. But that was before, Craig Wright came out and really pointed out to everybody, to those who would listen anyway, that Bitcoin could do these things, except the core developers really just handicapped it for whatever reason, right? They did it for reasons, maybe because they thought Bitcoin should only focus on money. Be a money, let everybody else do other things, right? Be a money first. So that was the prevalent, the what people thought at the time. And so that kind of like escalated into the block size wars. And so I was always for, it has to scale. I would rather build on one blockchain, not one blockchain plus another one side chain, whatever, drive chain. There's all these other sort of derivative solutions, which basically just said, we're just going to do all this other cool features in another blockchain and sort of just peg the coin back to the Bitcoin, which was just so overly complicated that I didn't see that really being viable. And And so I was always for the scalable blockchain, scalable Bitcoin. So that made me sort of be in the big blocker
Mhm.
camp. And then the first fork happened with Bitcoin Cash, when it was really just the SegWit, the core Bitcoin developers were introducing changes which would make it it was like no turning back point. Like if you make these changes into Bitcoin, then it's going to make all previous, the way we did transactions in the past invalid. It's going to make all the existing wallets invalid, and all the wallets are going to have to upgrade and do it. It's like, look, that's a problem. Not gonna sign up for that. I'd rather make changes which are very, which is basically just increasing the block size, right? Because that doesn't affect wallets. That affects the mining nodes, and the mining nodes are the people who are supposed to be taking responsibility here, right? If they need to upgrade their software, buy more hardware, whatever, to process these transactions, bigger blocks, then they have to do it. They're the ones who are getting the block reward. I mean, it's not me, an application developer or wallet developer, who has to jump through hoops, right? I mean, if that's the case, the system is fundamentally broken. If you get the ecosystem to change every time because you're changing the protocol, I don't want the protocol to change. I want those. I mean, if the node needs to have a bigger block size, that's not a protocol change. I mean, and that's the misconception as well. That just means that there is a breaking change, but it's not a protocol change, right? It's a change that requires them to change their nodes implementation, but only the mining nodes. So to me, as a user of the protocol, like a creator of transactions, one who needs to sign transactions, pass them around, and use the blockchain, nothing changes for me. I don't care what the block size was, right? I just care that my transaction works or doesn't work. So I thought that was very clear that we shouldn't make the ecosystem change. We should make the block infrastructure providers change their hardware. This game, but that the argument from the other side was that we don't want this sort of competitive environment. We don't want miners competing against each other and buying more hardware, because then whoever can afford the most hardware and the best bandwidth will win and make the most money. Yeah, I guess you hate capitalism, right? I was thinking, like, you hate capitalism then, I suppose. Yeah.
And that's where that Raspberry Pi meme comes from.
Yes.
Where they're all pleased with themselves because they have a Raspberry Pi and they say they're running the system on it.
They say that they're running the system. The system.
Yeah, it's just, it doesn't make any sense. You can't support a system on a flash drive.
They're not running the system at all. I mean, they're just they're double checking the work that miners did.
Exactly. Right.
Okay. So if you think double checking,
it could be, it's ludicrous, but it could be a psyop. I don't know. So anyway, so you were focused on practicality.
Yeah, I because I just really wanted to write, and getting into applications on blockchain. So I was for practicality, and then I guess after BCH went through its own sort of ideological schism as well. When there was a group who basically were big blockers, but they also didn't believe that the protocol shouldn't be changed.
It did that CTOR.
Yeah. Oh, yes, you're right. Yes, exactly. The ordering of transactions. They did that. They did many changes which were not original Bitcoin protocol. So they wanted to add something that would make it so that they could build a token layer on top of Bitcoin directly. Because they added a new opcode, or I think they eventually did add a new opcode, which enabled wormhole. But that was all just another.
That. Right. I was a bit scammed by that. I got all excited listening to them talk about the Cambrian explosion.
Yeah. I mean, and wormhole was really just. Excuse me. Wormhole was just Bitmain's attempt at capturing a part of the market, right? Capturing all the tokenization market over BCH, and it was really okay. I don't blame them for trying to be capitalist, but once again we always go back to the same notion of, like, look, we all fundamentally want to be, proper capitalists here. So
Mm-hmm.
everybody's going to try to get an advantage over your competition. That's capitalism, right? But we have to sort of all agree to abide by the same set of rules, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if as long as we can say like these are the rules, as long as nobody breaks these rules, do anything else. Everything else is fair game, right? Try to capture the market, try to build a side chain, try to take all overall tokenization, try to make your own standard, da 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 da. But as long as these rules these rules are inviolate. So that if you don't draw that line, you will end up falling into the gutter the same way the BTC guys did, because they said, well, the only thing we want to abide by is Bitcoin as a store of value. Like rules, we'll change the
Mm-hmm.
rules. We'll reinterpret them however we think we see fit. Well, then there's the problem. You see fit. Who are you? You
Mm-hmm.
maybe, the next incarnation of Jesus Christ. Maybe you're the most like magnificent. No,
Magnanimous.
magnanimous. Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe you're the most great guy, but
Yeah.
for how long? I mean, once you die, because you're human, then
Mm-hmm.
you've already made it so that the rules are flexible. So it's the same thing as like, politicians and legacy. You could have a great king for 50 years, but then
Right.
his son is like insane and is
Yeah.
a tyrant.
Cycles for sure.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
We know that system doesn't really work. That's why we don't have monarchies so much anymore. And so that's why, like, how can you once you make it so that the system can be suppressed by the people who run the system, then the system will eventually be corrupted,
Mm-hmm.
because it just means one bad developer sometime in the future. So you
Right.
have to draw the line in the sand that says, like, look, this is the protocol. You can
Mm-hmm.
never change it. Nobody can ever change it. And that's the only rule we all agree on. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's why I really, don't change the protocol. Making a bigger block, that's fine, because Bitcoin didn't originally have a block size limit. Putting
Mm-hmm.
back the old opcodes, which were turned off because people were too afraid of what they would do, or they had a bug in them and they
Mm-hmm.
didn't know how to fix it, or they're too lazy to fix it. Turn
Mm-hmm.
those back on, because that was originally part of the protocol, right? Why is that important? Because fundamentally, there could be somebody who created a transaction back in 2009 that
Mm-hmm.
depends on that thing. And you don't know who they are. You don't know where they are. You know that they exist. But the fact that somebody created a transaction, perhaps a contract, and then signed something with somebody else on another
Mm-hmm.
party using that contract, if you change the what opcodes mean in Bitcoin, you could have broken their legal contract, right? That's not.
Mm-hmm.
And we discussed these things back in the debate days of 2014-15. But the BTC core guy said, well, like, if anybody has something that would break, they should just, speak up, raise your hand, say, like, I'm using this, don't break this.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, I mean, that's a solution, but that's a solution now because the economy is small, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody using Bitcoin probably is reading this, this forum. But
Right. And again, it goes back to them and their power. Oh, just
hey,
tell me about it.
yeah, tell me about it. And
Yeah.
okay, so right there, that's your scaling block. How do you propose this system to work when Bitcoin is running the world, right? Are you going to ask everybody in Papua New Guinea, like, if you're
Mm-hmm.
using this opcode because we're going to change the global Bitcoin opcode,
Mm-hmm.
transaction format. If you break, let us know. And then you have, like, 20,000 requests that's from different parts of the world that say we're using it, don't. And like okay,
That's
that's really dumb,
true. And they did do that with El Salvador.
right?
Crazy. That's crazy. As far as capitalism, I want to jump in on my definition would be choosing the best, always choosing the best. I want the best.
Yep.
What's the best? That's the best. I want the best.
Yep. The
I
best.
mean,
Because the
it
best
could
is
be
money.
right. It could be that you want the best thing, best quality, the, what is working the best machine, the best innovation. And the same with the way that they see the Raspberry Pis versus a server farm. I want the best. What's going to be the best?
Right.
And so I think that's an important point about capitalism. And also, What you said, it sparked a thought for me, but I forgot it. So that's okay. I think that it was along the lines of the yeah, I don't know. I completely forgot what the point was.
May-
But yeah.
Maybe my comeback. I mean, I wanted to sort of summarize this as like, capitalism doesn't work without a working set of rules that we all follow. Right?
Hmm.
Anarcho-capitalism is not a real thing, because I do not believe that capitalism can work in anarchy. Right?
Right. Hmm.
Because the problem that there will always be corruption is like evil. It's always around the corner. You can keep it at bay, but it's
Hmm.
always the potential for evil, or the potential for corruption is always there. And
Hmm.
no matter what system you
Oh, yes. I remember now. So Rockefeller.
oh,
I love John D. Rockefeller. I think he is fantastic. He systemized the whole flow of the refining of oil,
mm,
which was better. It was the best. He made it the best, and
yeah,
then he made it across the board for everyone to use. And he took control of it, and a lot of people fought him, but they were not as good as what he was doing.
mm,
And so he made it a system, and I think that was really good.
mm,
And then later, when I looked at some of his children, like his maybe grandsons, I don't like them. I don't like the kind of things they were involved in, or the kind of ideologies that they promote. I think maybe because they grew up with such, of the, I guess, the wealth part,
mm,
where, they almost feel like rich guilt, where they've got to be so good and put on this good face when it could be inauthentic in the first part. And the second part, they could be fools. They're just trying to fit in, or they
mm,
think, oh, I want to be down with the people. And they have no idea what that's like, because they've never been down.
mm,
They've just been up, up, up and spoiled. So then maybe I think that some of their ideologies are totally whack, and I don't like them. But there could be, just like any family, there could be people you like, and then other people you think, oh gosh. So yeah, I'm not. I don't know if they're all these terrible people, like you might see in a conspiracy theory video, but definitely the forefather, Rockefeller, he did really wonderful things, and people will vilify him,
mm,
and they'll say in history, oh, what a jerk, what a terrible guy, and he did this. But you know what? When I was a kid, I was probably like maybe 8 years old, and I went to the Cleveland Museum of Art, and I saw the Thinking Man, Rodin's Thinking Man
mm.
statue. And it was amazing. And I was a kid, and I looked up at it, and the feeling, and just being there at the museum. And I even posed, thinking like below it. And that was from Rockefeller. That was from him. So
Oh,
I think,
the museum was his collection.
well, I think he
Oh,
donated it.
oh,
Yeah, he donated it.
okay.
A lot of the art, maybe the art, or just the construction of the museum, and a lot of
Um,
the works as well. So I am appreciative of him. But I just want to say that about capitalism, and also about the dynastic cycles, is that yes, you could have someone who is not perfect, but they're great. And maybe they do things the best. And then they set up a system, and it's the best. And then because of that, brings greatness to a lot of people.
yes.
People everywhere have access to oil, and then that led to so much in our history. So I think that I admire that a lot. But then I'm willing to concede that it doesn't mean that everything that his family would do after that would be great or coming up roses.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's and there needs to be a mechanism in capitalism where inefficient um ideas or bad ideas are weeded out. Everything should be tried, but bad ideas need to be weeded out and those people need to fail, and that should apply to rich people as much as regular people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think where a lot of people feel it's unequal is like, well, they think that rich people have a bigger safety net, right? If they can screw up more and not, how many times could you screw up as a son of Rockefeller? Probably a lot of times, right? How
Mm-hmm.
many times can you screw up as like a, lower middle class,
Yeah.
entrepreneur?
Look at
Once.
Ted Kennedy. No.
Um,
Sorry, that's not funny. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's true. You got one chance, and you never give up, and you just keep going, persevere.
exactly. But I think, I think it's fair. I think it's, yeah, I would say fair, or even I would say just. Let's say just. That's a better word.
Trust.
I think
Yeah.
it's just that Rockefeller's son has more chances because his father built so much that he earned it, and he passed those get
Mm-hmm.
out of jail cards to his son. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I think the whole notion of a get out of jail card passed from father to son is like topical, considering the whole Hunter Biden thing these days.
Oh my gosh. Also, I shouldn't be laughing. Terrible. Seriously.
Oh,
Oh gosh, it's true. Yeah. So that is the other thing where you have that families, yeah, they could be like that. So again, we're just commenting on people. People are not perfect. There could be corrupt people, there could
no,
be people with integrity everywhere. And it doesn't make the system bad. It just
no.
means that there are some corrupt people there right now.
Yeah. And I think as long as the system is not perfect, but it's the best we got so far, right?
Mhm.
I think that's what really people have to recognize. Anarcho-capitalism doesn't work because that's a system where there's nobody agrees on what the set of rules that you can't break are.
Mhm.
Just like if the rules of Bitcoin didn't have this rule that says you never change the protocol. If you change the protocol, you're a different coin, right? If you just
Mhm.
have that rule, you can kind of feel safe that the next 100, 500 years, Bitcoin will grow, but everybody will still grow, according to those rules. And if those rules are insufficient, then you move over to another system, right? But you don't change that system. So that's the one golden rule. And I think that's why anarcho-capitalism, because if you don't have a set of laws, you don't acknowledge that there are people that we will put in place who will enforce the laws we all agree on. If there's
Mhm.
not that, then, and you don't give that body the authority to enforce the laws, then you can't enforce anything else. There's contract law, courts, nothing can be enforced consistently. And their argument is always, well, courts will do it for profit. Well, no, I don't think you can ever. I don't think the people you put in charge of law enforcement and making that business for profit is a good idea. I mean, talk about adding gasoline to a fire. It's like, well, we have this problem with corruption, but we'll solve it by making the courts corruptible. The judge who gives the judgment that that I want will get my bribe, and that'll be totally legal. What?
Mhm.
So now we're totally devolving into a system where the rich really literally pay to get away with murder, and that would be totally fine in anarcho-capitalism. What? It's like no, but everybody will through ethical means and ethical moral code will abide by the don't harm other. What is the libertarian code like?
Yes,
Don't
I
tread
know.
on me.
Right. Don't
Don't use
well,
violence against anybody else, right?
is that it?
No,
Okay.
no use of violence against anybody else or something.
Yeah, that's like don't as long as you don't harm anyone else.
Yeah, exactly,
Everything's fine as long as you're not harming anybody.
exactly. So
It's
on paper,
right.
that sounds great.
Mhm.
On paper, that
Right.
sounds great, but who's going to enforce that rule? What if somebody starts harming everybody else? What are you going to all do? You're all going to band together and say, "Well, he's breaking the rule." Okay, maybe that won't happen. But now
Mhm.
but but once again, that's like you're just relying on people to all band together
Right.
when
There's no
one
absolute.
there's no absolute
Yeah,
like
there's no absolute. Everything is relative, right? With
right.
that. But yeah, also with that, I do think a dash of anarchy, if you could call it anarchy, is good because that leads to innovation. So it's that you have your absolute, but then you say, well, why not be better?
Oh, well, that's for sure. And but
Yeah.
I would I agree with that, but I wouldn't call that anarchy. I would say like because the rules just define what we shouldn't do. I don't think we have
Hmm.
rules that define what we should do.
Hmm.
So what you shouldn't do is like in the course of building your business, right? Pollute the water, right? There's a rule against that, but there's
Hmm.
no rule that says you should not try to innovate and make a better airplane or, but you know. So I think innovation can exist
Hmm.
in capitalism. We just have to agree on the set of rules that we all shouldn't break. And then we also need to basically say, like, we're going to have a system where we can put in place the people who can enforce these rules. They can't be for profit, because if it
Hmm.
was, then you're just going to have the rich, profitable pay off all of the law enforcement, all the mercenaries to be
The
the
mob.
muscle. And now it just becomes like the rule by the rich,
Hmm.
um, which is, you know, not a solution as well, which is like the, I guess, the opposite of communism. I
Hmm.
think capitalism is that medium point where you do have rich having more influence, but you still have, you know, a public sector which is supposedly not corruptible by the rich. You know, on paper, they're not corruptible. And the problem is, in reality, a lot of them are. But that why don't we solve that problem? If we solve the problem that it's harder to corrupt them by use of transparency systems and
Hmm.
transparent payments and transparent blah. If we did all that transparency, which is everything that's opposite of, you know, the whole anonymity movement, but if we made the public people transparent, made all these things transparent and accountable, then maybe they're less corruptible. And if they're less corruptible, then we can trust them to enforce the laws fairly. And if they enforce the laws fairly, then we can trust our legal system, so we can make new laws that we think are more just, because we know that they will be enforced properly. So, I mean, everything sort of snowballs, but we just
Hmm.
have to start from the notion that you need transparency in the people who you put in place to do the enforcements, the
Hmm.
governments, effectively. Effectively, what
Right.
I'm saying is we need more transparent governments.
And it makes me think of Frobots again. You get the transparency of the NPCs, right? So, with this, we have set the absolute of we need rules, and the rules we will follow. And the rules are that this system has this functionality, and the rules of the game originally, when the board was made, let's play the game. Let's
Yeah.
play with the rules, the original rules. And then we get to CBDC. So, this is what's so interesting is that Bitcoin, that was a bit of a surprise,
Mhm.
right? It just came out and it wasn't necessarily following the rules, one could say, right? Because they say, oh, you can't make money, but it's a money, right?
Well, I know I have to disagree with that. I think there is no rule that says you can't make your own money. Monopoly does it all the time. Like
That's true.
Parker Brothers make it all the time when they print a Monopoly box,
Yeah,
right?
Warner Brothers. That's true. That's
Uh,
true.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
good
But
point. Good point.
yeah, and I think Bitcoin did not break any rules in its launch,
Mm-hmm.
because there was nothing that forces you to give any value to a Bitcoin. Just like
Right.
there's nothing that forces me to put any real value to my Monopoly money in the
Mm-hmm.
box Monopoly game. So the fact that people did is not illegal either. Like, you can't force me not to put value on something, right? If I want to sell
Mm-hmm.
you this thing for, like, you know, $100 and you said yes, there's no law that prevents you from doing that, because
Mm-hmm.
this is not contraband or anything that's, you know, deemed illegal. So therefore, Bitcoin didn't really break any rules. And this is actually where a lot of differences between a lot of blockchain projects lie, right? A lot of these blockchain projects did issue themselves things which are securities, which is very different than what Bitcoin did.
Ah,
Like XRP, I think was XRP one of the things we were supposed to discuss? Yeah, I mean, that's one of them. They
mm-hmm.
they issued coins, 100 billion XRPs initially, and then they sold them
Right.
to,
And they
right?
issue them to themselves.
Of course, yeah, of course you issue to yourselves, right? That's what founders. Hey, founders, right? I have the right to be rich because I made this project. Um, but that's, you know, right. You know, it's not the fact that they were greedy; it's the fact that they sold them. If you issue something and sell them, as part of building your system. It's now a shared enterprise. That's a security. And now that would be like what you just did now is this is no longer the pen I wanted to sell you. This is like, the packet of cocaine I want to sell you. Now that's not legal because there's a law that says cocaine is a contraband item, right? Depends on your country, I guess. Maybe you're out there, you're in a country where that's not illegal. So, just
really? Oh,
I
no.
don't know. I don't know. I'm just saying that there may be possible some country, like maybe in the middle of the Congo. I don't think they have any. I don't know.
Who knows? That's true.
Who knows?
Depends on your jurisdiction.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we're discussing things in your jurisdiction that are deemed contraband. And so in the jurisdiction of America and most of the Western society, there's some notion of something's a security, and there are laws regarding what you need to do with securities, and those projects did not do them. So that makes them not so well. They're legally in a little bit of water there, where Bitcoin is clear, right? It didn't. Nobody took money to launch Bitcoin. Nobody took money at all. Nobody asks for anything when you run the node software.
That's a good point. Yes. Thank you, Jerry. Yeah, because I've heard people say that before. And I thought, oh, yeah, what about that? So then we have CBDCs, which would use Bitcoin as their infrastructure base. Right?
Yeah.
And then, as I understand it, especially from listening to Satoshi's broadcasts a couple years ago, it's that with the BSV blockchain, with N-Chain's solution for CBDC, you can have interoperability so that the countries, the central bank, could build their CBDC, and then another country in another jurisdiction could build their CBDC, and yet it would be interoperable for the global market flows and liquidity, for the flows of money all around the globe all the time.
Yeah.
We could trade together. Now, I used to live in China, and then I still have a lot of friends in China. And with Alipay or Alibaba, if you want to buy something, it's fine. They will take the foreigner's money, as we're called. They'll take our money. But if we try to sell something, there's no way for anyone in China to pay us. So that, I believe, is a choice. That is an intentional, set of control. So would they, let's say, not want the interoperability of being able to have money flow all around the world? Would they want to close off the market still?
My opinion?
Yes, your opinion. Yeah, just I'm thinking.
I guess if the question is whether or not I think the central party is still trying to exert influence over monetary monetary policy or the economy.
Yeah, the economy, letting people buy things from abroad, really.
Yeah, I think they definitely are still in the position where they want to have a tight control of things. But I believe their desire for control does not stem from necessarily trying to stop retail flow. I think their desire for control is more to control the large institutional underground movement of money that these payment rails may enable. So I think the CCP is always more worried about the rich industrialists in China leaving with all their money and wealth out of China. And then you can sort of see why they'd be worried about this, because there are ways to get really rich in China, but you sort of take the good with the bad. The good is that you have the CCP makes it so that if you know the right people, you could become very wealthy. But the bad is that you have to live under the control of the CCP. So you can imagine that a lot of people who, once they make the wealth, are like, that's great, I have all my money now, that'd be great if I can bail right? If I could just like leave and like flee to like Estonia or something like that and live the rest of my life with like Richard Branson on his island in the Caribbean, right? Why if you're a Chinese industrialist, maybe you want to sort of like, okay, see you later, thanks guys. So a lot of them have a very, very big desire to hedge themselves against the central government and to move their wealth outside of China to park, just as a little stash. So in case I get on the wrong side of the next political leader and he decides to have me and my family thrown in prison, I can just run away to whatever, and then I have money outside. So you can clearly see this is a huge demand and desire of anybody of wealth in China, because Chinese aren't stupid. I mean, they know, like, you got wealthy because you played by the party's rules, and what happens with one day you have an opposing opinion, right? So this is why that flow is what the CCP wants to stifle, to make sure that there are not easy ways for you to move wealth out of China. Not because of like, I want to be a draconian tyrannical leader just to stop people from being able to buy like little toys from like Chinese manufacturers. No, they honestly don't give a crap about that, right? It's like that's peanuts. They don't want to stop flow. They want to stop the industrials from moving their money, the rich people from moving money out. So that's why they will want to keep control over their currency, not allow Alipay or WeChat Pay or these things to. I mean, they keep tight control over those companies, right? So like, if WeChat Pay starts allowing tens of millions of dollars to move out, well, then we're gonna have a chat with the CEO of WeChat, right? We're gonna have a little tea time with him, and maybe we throw him in jail for a little bit, or we get him to basically stop that, right? You can't blame the Chinese government from doing this, but that's political.
So my focus on this is with the regular people, just lots of families. I think it's a huge market, right?
Yeah.
So if all of the local people everywhere, all the billions of people in China, were to have access to the global market where they could purchase goods from abroad, there could be some risks associated with that. I believe maybe to the stability of the country, of the government, possibly. So maybe that would be why it would be restricted. But for myself as an English teacher, I would love to be able to just meet my students online and have them pay me.
Yeah.
But if they don't have Bitcoin, and they don't have, I can't receive Alipay. I cannot receive money from China as an English teacher. There's no way, but I could go on Alibaba and I could buy something and have it shipped to my home in America. So it's one way. The market is closed. So this is more of my focus. So if they have the CBDC with interoperability for the world, we say, oh, this is a good thing, but then maybe, that's not wanted everywhere. So even if, let's say, that's not wanted, would there still be a benefit to having interoperability in the back end?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's just a matter of time before even governments like China will realize that there is a value both sides for interoperability between digital currencies. Because they're not, like, as long as their laws are upheld, and there's no law or there's no policy, I should say, in no open policy in China which says, like, we don't want that use case which we don't want to allow that use case which you just described. We don't want to allow Chinese people paying small amounts. Like, how much would you pay for like a English lesson on I think maybe $30, $100, anything less than $500 let's say, right? I don't believe there's any policy anywhere that in China would say we don't want that amount of payments outflow, because that's not at the level where they care about. So they would probably, as long as we could have a system which will allow them to maintain control over the types of payments they do want to control, like say somebody in China wanted to send right? $10 million to Europe. Okay, like clearly even the US would want to control that, right? We're not even talking about China anymore.
What's going on here?
Right? You can't send anything more than 10,000 without your banks making a record of it. And you probably won't be able to send 1 million without calling your bank first and explaining where the money's coming from. And okay, these are laws that we have to preserve. And if you don't like them, then bank with somebody else or go to a different country that doesn't have these laws. But if those laws that can be upheld, then I think the CCP would be fine with it. I don't think they inherently don't want people to buy services from the outside, especially if it's like this kind of stuff, right? Like digital content, which I think it's a very interesting topic, because the world is moving towards more content existing outside of physical space, like exists in metaverse space, right? If more valuable things exist only in metaverse, then there shouldn't be any reason why Chinese customers or buyers goes into like some global metaverse space, buys like a chocolate martini virtual. I don't know why people would do these things, but whatever. I buy a chocolate martini so I can look like I'm holding a chocolate martini in this like virtual horizon or like thing, and I'm going to pay some sort of money for that. And there should be a way where that should be handled interchangeably, like through automatic foreign exchange or something, such that the buyer is okay with holding digital renminbi.
Right, because they have the digital renminbi.
Yeah.
Since the Olympics, the Winter Olympics, I believe.
Yeah.
They were testing it. They were testing it out. And so they're already building their digital currency. And then it's the other countries all around the world that I guess are just in, heads down mode.
Yeah, and like the digital versions of a central bank fiat currency is completely doable. I mean, what I'm trying to say, it's practical, because they get everything they want, right? They want to, at the end of the day, if you hold, I have renminbi because I have a bank account in China, right? And I can access that bank account through WeChat. So technically I have digital RMB because I mean, if I needed to pay somebody on WeChat for something right now, I could go through WeChat and pay them, because I would just send money to them through WeChat Pay, and that would deduct eventually my balance from my Chinese bank, right? And so if that level of control the government's happy with, then there's nothing wrong with just like throwing that into, instead of using WeChat, make it Bitcoin. Now, the little bit of loss of control is like WeChat, the government can sort of have a chat with the CEO of WeChat. Yeah. But
China.
But I think that just the control doesn't disappear. The control just moves from you no longer have a chat with WeChat. If you had CBDC, you're going to have some company, maybe a bank, that is basically going to take your renminbi bank account and then wrap it and put it as a token onto Bitcoin, for instance, right?
Right.
So that bank account still has full control over your real renminbi balance ledger, right? It's just like you've tokenized it and you put it onto Bitcoin. So that wrapped Bitcoin or renminbi, that Bitcoin wrapped renminbi. No, sorry, that renminbi. Anyway, that token.
That
can, yeah, it's always confusing to remember. That can be used to pay somebody in virtual space, and the idea is like they still have control over the real renminbi, so they shouldn't have any worries about that. Now, the only thing is that when these people who have this digital renminbi want to buy something, the other way, the other direction of the trade, then they may move that digital Bitcoin wrapped renminbi to some other, maybe a Chinese buyer, right? And then that Chinese buyer may eventually go back to the bank and say, like, I would like to redeem these. So because the control point is the redemption now, right? And that only people with bank accounts in China can unwrap that renminbi, right? If you couldn't unwrap it. If you have no bank account in China, somebody gives you digital RMB to pay for your services, and you're willing to accept it, that's great. there's no problem I can see that the central government would have with this, because sure, you are holding all this digital RMB, but if push came to shove, they just go back to the bank account and say, like, cancel redemptions of these tokens, right? Because it's in a country that we have a sanction against or something like that, and they would love this ability to control. Which means if they have the ability to control, there's nothing for them to fear about this type of trade. So they'll let you earn all this RMB, knowing that, well, when Rory wants to spend this, she can't really just, spend digital RMB at the McDonald's in Boston. That, they don't accept digital RMB. So she's going to have to spend it back and buying something from our economy. And when that digital RMB comes back into our economy, it could circulate some more. But eventually, the only way it comes out of tokenization is at a Chinese bank. So we have total control. So this is how I think a lot of CBDCs will be structured, right?
Okay, all around the world.
Yeah, the government has control, and you can float, and Bitcoin becomes just the rails.
Right. So even in the States with the CBDC, or in England, right? In the digital pound, they would tokenize then.
Yes. And why, even in the States and England, they would do it? Because sure, there's no need for you to necessarily use digital dollars in the United States when you could just use PayPal. I mean, maybe there'll be some reason, some efficiency thing eventually, but let's just say hypothetically, like theoretically, there's no benefit, right? You can use PayPal, you can use writing a check, you can use all these options, in which case digitally wrapped dollar is just the same as your credit card, right? In fact, credit cards already bridge the country borders quite a bit, right? So this digital CBDC, this whole idea of CBDC is really challenging the credit card business, because the credit cards is how people pay for things internationally. And so if you didn't use credit cards, how would you pay something when you went to London with your dollars? Well, you can either go to a money changer first, but that's inconvenient, or you can use digital dollar. Maybe then every store which wanted to take digital dollar, maybe through a payment processor, which would make the conversion to digital pounds immediately, automatically, through their bank, they could do that. Now all of a sudden, the payment of money internationally can be done on a per transaction basis without using a credit card company. And I think central banks would love this, because well, they have more control over their money now too. I mean, for better or worse. So I'm not going to make that argument, but they would certainly want it. More people
and
use that.
For better or worse. So my friend Nightmare K-Hawk is a Monero pro.
Yeah.
And I've spoken with him at length about CBDCs, and he's very anti-CBDC because he's concerned about a government using your social credit score, such as Australia, to then restrict your purchases, and to even have programmable money where it says you can buy this spinach for the next 3 weeks, otherwise it disappears.
Sure.
This money disappears for your spinach allowance.
Sure. I mean, those are very valid concerns. I would be very worried if people weren't thinking about these kind of things, potential abuses of the system. But I think people also forget that they put themselves in a hypothetical scenario where there is an abuse in the system, and we also somehow are now transported to a completely totalitarian society where those abuses will be not heard by sympathetic ears somehow, right? It's like, well, the government's going to do this to me and I won't have any way to stop it, right? There'll be nothing for me to do to excuse me, I have a cold. And I don't think that's the case. I think like, look, I mean, a CBDC is so transparent, right, that if the government clearly stopped you from buying broccoli, I'm sure that would be in the newspapers immediately. I mean, it would be covered by if not newspapers, then Twitter and everything. You could say like, oh, the government's stopping me because blah blah blah. And then, we live in a world now where even like the most what's the word, the most
innocuous,
no, the section of society which people kind of like generally ignore, the most For instance, if you know, we live in a
Disregard.
overly, yeah, disregarded, disenfranchised, the most
Oh,
disenfranchised.
yes.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah. Always in the newspaper, right?
right,
Talking
like
about, I'm disenfranchised. I'm disenfranchised.
yeah, like me too. Like
No, yeah, let's all be
uh, I
disenfranchised.
feel prejudiced against. I don't feel safe
Yeah.
in my school. I'm like, look, we live in such an overly sensitive world. Are you really kidding me? That you're telling me that if the government using CBDCs prevented you from buying a hamburger at McDonald's, I really want me to believe that that's not going to cause the biggest stink ever? And you
Right.
think the government is so dumb that they're going to do that? I mean, there will be governments that will do that because, like China, because yes, there's a social credit score in China, and there will be ways which you may be prejudiced against. But how is that different from just your regular credit score these days? I mean, like you have a credit score, and that definitely comes into effect when you want to get a home loan or something like that. Is that an unfair system? I mean, I think that system's fair, right? Because so if that system's fair, do we really think that the government is going to go to the level which prevents you to buy, your daily bread because of some social credit score? Well, if that's the government that you live in, then you live in a horrible country. Move, right? or do something to change the government. That's not the context. That's not Bitcoin's problem. That's not the money system's problem. Yeah, I think that's something that.
Right. Yeah, thank you. That's true. Like to think about all these points. And that's why I'm so grateful to you and to Brittany and to Nightmare, because we have had this conversation now for several conversations,
Well,
and everyone has a different opinion. And I can completely understand where everybody's coming from. And I can see more ideas, more points, more information with every conversation that we have. And then that helps me to further explore this topic. And it is happening. It's already happening right now.
yeah.
And it is coming. And so, whether we don't like it or we like it, or whether we're idealist or we're realist, this is a transition that we are going through right now, all around the world.
And I'll also say, if you really are of that bent that you think this is like the worst thing ever, and I don't know what to do about it, I feel like this is terrible for society. Consider this: if all the world's governments moved over to CBDCs, and you are in a government where that is being used to prejudice you and disadvantage you somebody, don't use it. Like, use Bitcoin, because all CBDCs will be riding upon Bitcoin. And if you really think your government is doing such a bad job of and abusing their power, then stop using their CBDC, their currency. Just use Bitcoin instead. Because the beauty of, if everything moved if all governments move their currencies on top of Bitcoin, the beauty is that we all have Bitcoin, right? So that's one thing that you gain almost for free by default. And so I think that fact alone is going to keep a lot of governments from being abusive with their CBDC policies. Because if they abuse their own people, then you make a stink online, you make a whole YouTube channel about how horrible your government is. You get a lot of followers, and you get all this movement of everybody who's just going to say, well, I'm going to stop using the digital dong or a digital dollar, digital currency. I'm just going to start using the underlying coin which this system uses, which is Bitcoin, as my money system. And this is kind of like going back to the original. I hate to agree with them in this case, but the original BTC, monetarists, which are like, we're going to use Bitcoin, it's going to take over the world. We're going to use Bitcoin instead of using fiat currencies. I don't think that should be the thing you lead with. I don't think that's like the only goal of your system. But I do believe that it is an available option.
I see. Right? Yes, thank you. Yeah, because I had a friend that said that too, that was into BSV, and then said, hey, I don't know about this conference. They're up there talking about CBDCs, and I think we should just use Bitcoin. And I think, yeah, well, we got options, right? I mean, we could use the currency, the CBDC, and I guess, like you're saying, yes, we could also use Bitcoin if we so choose.
Yeah. I mean,
So
this
that's
goes back to what,
amazing. What
yeah, it
about
goes,
other coins? Because Nightmare talks about
yeah.
he's really likes using Monero.
Uh,
So in this world where we have CBDCs built on Bitcoin, which we mean BSV blockchain, then I guess people can use what they want. They could barter, they could trade IOU pieces of paper, they could use what they wanted to pay each other.
you mean like they, vis-a-vis Monero, like people could use.
Right, like the concept of choice, having
Oh,
choice.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's nothing. It's funny because when people like what you just said go to a conference and say like I don't think people should use or build CBDCs on Bitcoin. I think everybody should use Bitcoin instead. And then you ask the same person like, is this because you believe the people should have a choice? And then yeah, of course we should have the choices. I want my freedoms. Okay, well then why are you saying that people shouldn't use CBDCs? Isn't that other people's choice? Right,
Yeah, exactly.
right.
The more the
Like
merrier.
the fact you can't be for freedoms and then also turn around and say like I don't think people should be doing that. I think we should
Mhm.
only do this. Like what happened to the whole freedom thing? So
Mhm.
it's so hypocritical. But I honestly think people just generally have this mental block where when it's for what they want, they will argue to use freedom. They'll use whatever flag banner they want to
Mhm.
rally under. But then when it's on the other side of the coin, they're like, no, but the other side is totally wrong. So they shouldn't be given freedoms and everything. So, it's a silly. So I think like, yeah,
Mhm.
CBDCs, build them. Governments build them. Great. Use Bitcoin. It's like Craig always said, Bitcoin doesn't care. As long as you use it, it works almost, right?
Mhm.
If you use it for whatever you want to use it for,
Mhm.
your government, you want to use it for CBDCs, great. You don't like your government and you want to use it as money, great. You use Bitcoin, the coin, as money. Try to
Mhm.
get as many people into your economy as you want, right? That's up to you. You want to build it to do data tracking. You want to use it for transparency, logistics tracking, great, use
Mhm.
it. And pay for it using CBDCs on Bitcoin or pay for it with Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't
Mhm.
care. As long as you use it, it works and it grows and it eventually, because Bitcoin achieves its maximal potential and its maximal efficiency when the larger and larger number of people are doing something in it,
Mhm.
including governments.
Yes.
So you can't basically say like, no, no, we don't want those people using our system. Like, well,
Exactly. Yes, it's for everybody.
yes.
All hands on deck. Yes. Brilliant. Yes. Well, thank you, Jerry. This has been a wonderful spark of a conversation from Frobots through the history and philosophy and values, absolute relativism, all the way to CBDCs and the freedom of choice. Thank
Yes.
you.
No, thank you. Very welcome. It's always a pleasure. It's always good,
Yeah,
good to have a chat with
it is. So we
like-minded intellectuals.
exactly. It is what makes the world go round, I suspect. And to Brittany Bits, happy anniversary. We
Happy
wish
anniversary,
you
Brittany.
and your family a wonderful winter solstice. And here in Georgia, the weather has turned cold. They say on my alert, I get a weather alert email. It said, "This will be the coldest winter ever."
Oh,
How's the weather in Japan?
oh, it's mild. I think it's like 12 degrees, 15
Mm-hmm.
degrees. Well, I
Oh,
mean, in
so
Tokyo. Sorry.
that's in Celsius.
Oh, yeah, yeah, Celsius. You're right, right, right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, well, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
You
And
too?
then let's continue the conversation. Look
Yeah.
forward to hearing more about Frobots. And also, maybe we could do a big group chat on CBDC.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we can grab oh gosh, his name is eluding me right now. Gregory last
Bledsoe?
name. Huh?
Bledsoe?
Yes, yes, yes. I think that's
Ah, great. Okay, good point.
yeah, I think that there's a lot we can discuss. Um he's also has an interesting background. I'd like to hear a lot of his opinions on a lot of these topics.
Oh, fabulous. Okay, I'll reach out to him.
Mm. and I think one thing that is going to become more and more more and more interesting to the public in the in the near future is we should start involving more discussions with people and other projects, like cross-chain discussions, like Monero people and Solana,
Mm-hmm.
because I think this whole tribalism of blockchains is sort of counterproductive in the end. And I think it, as we start implementing things globally, more and more the need for jumping from one chain to the next, right? Even if it's a temporary state of affairs,
Mm-hmm.
the ability to do cross-chain swapping of tokens and everything is gonna become very important. And I think a lot of discussions, a lot of interesting things could be talked about on how that affects the economies of each token economy in each blockchain. So there's a lot of stuff that we can discuss.
Brilliant. Okay, Jerry, I love it. I've taken some notes. So that's what we'll look forward to in 2023 is conversations exploring these new realms.
That's right. The year of hopefully Web3.
Is it?
Yeah. So yeah. Merry Christmas to everybody and have a good, happy New Year.
Yes, thank you. And everyone watching, please remember to like the video. Oops, pardon me, I'm knocking the globe over. And subscribe to the channel for more scintillating conversations with us and all our friends here. And please do comment below. What is your opinion? What do you think of CBDCs? And do you know Bitcoin? Yes. So thank you again, Jerry, and welcome to Be in the Moment with you again soon.
All right. Thanks, Rory. It's a pleasure. Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Merry Christmas. See
Bye,
you later.
everybody.
Goodbye.